Our next session is going to focus on vendor management.
Vendor governance, what does it mean to you as a provider in the space?
So we see primarily three models. The first one is what we call the Wild West, where there is no vendor management in place. You might think that is like a paradise for us, right? But reality, it leads to a lot of misunderstanding. It's very difficult to define what success is, and there is no measure for that. So sometimes when you're having problems in the relationship, there is nobody really to help you to solve those issues. Then the second one is what we call the gatekeepers, or the Gestapo-like, where basically just focus on controlling costs, and they don't even let you talk to the different IT managers to really understand the problems. And the third one, the ones that are really focused on partnership, where the vendor management really facilitates the communication and the collaboration between both parts. I think one of the characteristics is that the vendor manager is not afraid to push back to either side. So if there is issues, they can go back to the manager and say, you know what, I don't think you are behaving correctly. I think you are doing this wrong, and this is what I think you should do.
Who should be involved in vendor governance from your organization and from your client's organization?
What we have seen is, especially when vendor management relies more on the IT side, not as much on the procurement side, is where it really helps. Because when it really relies on procurement, it's really everything about cost. In our side, you definitely have to have somebody that can understand the business as a whole, and also the program objectives of that customer, that can really translate that to your organization.
Andy, let's go to you. You're a buyer. You work with a lot of IT providers. Tell us about your view of governance. Who's involved? Who does it well? The balance between maybe the business side, the IT side, some of your functional stakeholders, procurement, and what it takes to work well.
You know, for us, it's all about value. So it's a combination of quality and cost. I mean, there's a certain level of maturity I think the organization has to get to in managing it. And there are some companies that obviously they're focused on cost, and they're going to go for the cheapest solution. But for us, it's really about a long-term partnership. And what we found over the years is it's gone from a procurement, very focused approach to a much more balanced, nuanced conversation. And part of it is because you have a lot of smaller contracts where integration of those different groups, those different support organizations is really critical. So if you're looking at solving a problem, my users don't care that I've got 5 different vendors that are supporting that solution resolution. They just want it to work. As you work through this, it's really developing a much more mature capability to get the most value out of that relationship. And that takes a combination of legal, procurement certainly, but a large contingent of IT people that have the technical understanding of what it takes to actually provide that service. To us, that's really critical because they can speak the same language as a service provider. It ends up being a much more efficient dialogue. As a result, instead of having a very thin engagement team working with our vendors, we actually have service delivery leads from each technology stream that are responsible for engaging with those vendors. We meet on a regular basis and have a large group meeting where everybody participates in that.
I'm really glad that you want to call this out, because if you were to ask me in the hallway what is vendor governance, I would tell you it is almost all contract management. So in my world, I just feel like the governance is that day-to-day tactical management of the vendor invoicing and that sort of thing. So we'll use governance as something different. So I would say that we'll use contract management as that, what I was calling governance. And in the vendor management organization, I think the percentage of actual contract management would be probably around 30% of your time is on that, and the rest is on something else. And that's all about the relationship in the middle between the CIO that's trying to provide some overall strategy, the business IT folks that are trying to do a bunch of work, procurement, which is trying to get the right vendors, and then the vendors. And each of those have relationships. And I don't think those relationships are nurtured particularly well through all of that. And I think that vendor management can ensure that each of those folks have the right expectations and the right understanding of each other. So that's kind of what I think, where I think vendor management parks. And I agree with Ricardo that when it's not a part of procurement, it's actually a better thing.
But I think you would have to agree that a part of governance is realizing the benefits of the business case when the deal was envisioned, right?
Certainly.
So I would guess there has to be some sort of healthy tension involved between procurement, the business, the provider, to make sure the value is often and always being brought to the table.
Just an interesting side note, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, is, there is a point where you're driving costs too hard. And the relationship starts to deteriorate, right? We're all in this to make money. I'm there to make a profit making stuff. Our provider's there to make a profit providing services, and we find there's a balance. And sometimes we've gone too far, and that's an interesting discussion about.
And one of the things that we say at Pace Harmon is you sort of have to know when to let the air out of the deal, right? When we're negotiating the deal, you want to make it as airtight as possible, right? You want to squeeze as hard as you can, and then let the runoff happen in the operation. But sometimes you have to know when to let the air out of the deal. So when you're operating in these deals and you're governing these deals, how do you know when you've hit that point that you need to let some air out, and how do you do that?
We have these quarterly executive reviews with the very senior leadership of our partners come in, and we talk, and you get a sense of where they're at. We don't talk about their financials necessarily, but you can feel the pain. If you've got a relationship with them and you're in that discussion, you can definitely tell. And then there's opportunities where you say, okay, I'll fund that. Yeah, the contract says that, but I'll cover that, right? And what you find is that after you do that a few times, they're doing the same thing with you. It becomes a much different discussion. We end up focusing a lot more on talent on both sides of the relationship versus the money part. At the end of the conversation, the money part, we'll figure it out. I mean, we're both satisfied, because at the end of the day, the service is doing what it's supposed to do from a performance perspective, and it's providing that flexibility that we need it to provide. The money becomes not as important, ironically. So,
In governance, what do you see as things that are working really well, and how did you get there? What were the lessons learned that got you there? And what are the things you're doing right now that you think aren't working so well?
So I was with GE for 36 years, so that's kind of all I knew, and it was all in IT, and it was the last 20 of it was all around vendor management. So when I got to UPS, obviously coming into an entirely different place, coming into a vendor management organization, I'm director of vendor management, that's supposed to mean something. And the first thing the procurement came to me and said, what exactly are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to do some stuff. And they said, well, why on earth would you ever talk to the vendors? That's what they actually said to me, and that floored me. I said, I'm director of vendor management. I think talking to the vendors is what it's all about. Vendors, if the only thing a vendor is just a staffing company, then the only thing they care about are named people. They're just going to go out and get resumes and give them to you. But that's not what most of the vendors do. They are trying to build their organization. They want to build and align to you as a client. You have to let them do that. Do your vendors come to you with ideas? You have to allow them to come to you. You have to be willing to listen to them. And oftentimes, there isn't anybody to do that. Procurement is kind of saying, I'm not interested in that. I just want to get another $10 out of you. The CIO is just too unapproachable oftentimes. The business folks are all heads down. I want to get my project done. There's nobody there to say, well, wait a minute, let's think bigger and try to understand the rest of what it is that the vendor is willing and can bring, and how it aligns to your needs as well. It is about interfacing more deeply with the vendor, that whole relationship, and I think that's how things get better. So as far as what's not working well, this movement from kind of an FTE-based contract, I want 3 people, I want 5 people, to I want you to, I'm going to give you some requirements and you just figure out how to put that together. We claim a lot of the work we're doing is in that fixed price solution based, but under the covers it's not really. It's really fixed price with a little bow on it. And getting people to understand that to me it's not about individual named people, it's about the vendor and the vendor's delivery of things. So that's the stuff that's not working well. We have to continue to get people to look at requirements and not people.
From your perspective, what do you see as things that you're doing that are working really well and are resonating really well with your clients, and what things aren't working so well that your organization says we've got to put this on a roadmap for improvement?
Sure. I would like to give 2 examples. One is what works. I think allowing your key vendors to help you to define solutions or find solutions to your problems. So an example is one of our customers in the healthcare that is growing very rapidly. Basically, it's having a lot of a big backlog of innovation projects. But the reality is that all the subject matter experts are tied in the day-to-day support activities. So we actually propose a 360-degree IT assessment. And the most important thing is during the 2 weeks that the assessment lasts, we were having checkpoints every day with the CIO, presenting the findings and really defining the solution. So at the end, we're actually to present something that aligned to the business and aligned to his needs. We were able to free out budget, and we were able to free out the resources so they can invest in innovation. Then on the other side that doesn't work, I think staffing definitely is one of the things that I don't think it works at all. Limits the ability of the customer to tap in the vendor's expertise. So a very basic example is we usually get asked for very senior profiles, and then our people ended up doing very basic stuff. So, I mean, it doesn't work in terms of economics for the customer. And then our people get bored and then start looking for other companies.
I guess I'll just jump to what I think doesn't work or we're having challenges with. We signed a deal last year for global infrastructure support, and included in that were a tremendous number of transformation programs. Part of the challenge when we talk about talent is when you're talking about global data center consolidations and movement, you know, there are some huge technical challenges to doing some of that work, and you really need some very talented technical people to be able to manage that process in the most effective way. And they've got to have experience doing it. What we find is our people, we're looking for outcome-based results, right? But our people start to try and dictate what they do. So we're asking for these talented people, then we start telling them how to do their job, and then we're in this situation where they're feeling a little bit like they're not being leveraged effectively. But then, to add matters, make it worse, is there's a cultural dynamic that's a reality in working. So you have your corporate culture. We find in a lot of cases our vendor partners, they have a culture of deference to the employees or the company, you know, Corning. And you really can't have that. You need to have a real partnership where somebody can go, wait, you're off base. This is how you need to do that, and we're working through that with a variety of companies, actually. So that's a challenge for us.
What I'm hearing is that governance is collaborative, it's strategic, it's forward-looking, it's improvement-oriented. Now, I'm going to guess that at least one person in this room, when we said we're here to talk about governance, expected to hear someone talk about SLAs. And nobody here mentioned SLAs. Why not? The role of SLAs, it's got to have a role in governance. Yes, no?
It's table stakes. You just have to deliver on the contract, the performance requirements. So we've very few problems from a service level performance perspective with our partners across the board in a variety of different contracts. They do that job well. Where we have issues is incremental kind of project delivery work, transformation work. But if you can't deliver on the SLA, we're not even going to have a conversation about the other stuff. Right? So that's just table stakes, and we assume that it's going to work well, and sometimes it doesn't. We get that back on track, but partners that we've contracted with have global reputations of delivery. From our perspective, we focus way more, I should say much more, on those other intangible things and the more strategic conversation than just delivering a service.
Tim, your perspective?
No, I agree. He calls them table stakes. I call it the DNA. I mean, the vendor has to deliver. That's a given. And if they don't, they're gone, and we'll get somebody else in because there's always another vendor that wants to come in. So that becomes not my first priority. That just is. So maybe my first priority is price. Maybe my first priority is a certain kind of technical talent capability. Vendor management, like I said, I think it's 70% or more of that time. It has nothing to do with what I was calling governance, but the contract management stuff.
Yeah.
From a provider perspective, I'd like to hear.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in our preference, that's the model that we actually push in terms of the service, of how we like to engage. So usually when we're in a process of to be selected to a new customer, there's a lot of questions in terms of service level agreements and whether we can do managed service. And this, yes, that's actually our preferred way of engagement. But then what happened is, even though that's the intent of the program or of the top management to do managed services, then sometimes get lost in translation and you go to the day-to-day and you go back to staffing. So when there's staffing, I mean, it's difficult to talk about SLAs. When we actually manage to convince the customers that the managed service is the way to go, then definitely the first challenge is identifying those meaningful SLAs. Now we are really focusing more on business level agreements, really to see how what we're doing impacts or not the business, not as much on the technical side.
When I see the governance presentations, and when I participate in those meetings, the SLAs are around the third slide.
Without that working, there's no other conversation.
So we don't get to the conversation
Yeah.
about strategy. Now,
You can't.
I'm with you now.
You can't play if you don't put the money on the table to play.
Yep.
Right? And SLA
Exactly.
and meeting those is a foundational item to the relationship. If you can't do that, we're not going to talk about anything else.
And there's just a point here. Ricardo won't like this part, but
This is when it gets good.
It's really, really important that a vendor understands they stand to lose you as a client. That the client has the ability to change a vendor. Where I am now, when I got there, that understanding was not there. The vendors that were there just assumed that they would stay there forever. Once we demonstrated that we had that capacity to change a vendor out, and we did, everything changed. And so table stakes, DNA, whatever you want to call it, that's the stuff you have to do, and you just have to do that no matter what. So then that allows you to talk about the rest of the.
So more important than the SLA is the contract flexibility that gives you a lever, right? That I may not be a client tomorrow.
Absolutely.
My customers, internal leadership of our company, look at me in some regards like a vendor, right? If as an IT executive, I can't deliver on the basic services that they need to run their business, they're not going to talk to me about enabling new capabilities or helping them deliver in a new geographic region. They're going to look at me and laugh and say, you can't even do what your basic things are that I require of you. So that's what we mean by table stakes. I mean, it is a foundation of the relationship.
Yeah. What we haven't talked about is the as-a-service offering and how that's sort of taking IT into a different place, and the role of IT is changing, and the role of our functional partners is changing. But now we're looking at point solutions, and these are things maybe like ServiceNow. How does that change governance going forward, and how do we take those functions and bring them into governance and get their level of maturity up to where ours in IT is, who's been doing this for so long?
IT definitely is, some people would say it's declining. From our perspective, it's actually expanding because it's really about, always going to have the need to manage internal services. So we do quite a bit of manufacturing at Corning. The bringing together of all these different components, you think about that dance, right? The orchestration of those services so that they really are seamless. It's really a much more complicated, nuanced activity than it used to be, where you either sourced it all out or you did it all in-house, right? And so managing that interplay between all those different components is really what you've got to be good at as an IT executive in today's world.
The roles within IT, or I should say the capabilities that need to exist within IT, are likely changing because of this.
We say less about turning wrenches and more about strategic capabilities. And then you also can't forget that we're really there to help our businesses be successful.
Right.
It really does become a lot different role than maybe it was 20 years ago, but I believe it's really expanded, not contracted.
It seems like our IT role is part technician, but it's also part operator. And you have to understand your function and bring that together to work with the provider to help them understand your environment, because they're likely understanding their own environment better than maybe yours as the client. Tim, I'd like your perspective on this, on the changing role of IT and the changing role of your functional stakeholder.
as a service, as cool as it sounds and as much as it seems like it solves a lot of things, I don't think that we're going to get there as fast as everybody thinks we're going to get there. So I just am not convinced that it's going to change that fast. It all depends on the culture of the company, the kind of company that you have, and so on. But it looks to me like there's a runway that is pretty darn long for a lot of the stuff that's going on today. When those changes come, absolutely things will have to change. But one of the things is I don't feel that I have all the answers at any given time. So yeah, I agree that things have to change, and I just think the vendors can help you get there, absolutely. But again, I'm challenging how fast that change is actually going to happen.
How does that change how, as a provider, you come to governance? Does it change what you talk about? Does it change who you talk to?
The basic dilemma is what everybody calls shadow IT, right? So the business actually going directly to buy a solution. But reality is today, as everybody is most focused on innovation, definitely the people that we talk to are different, are more in the business side, and they really want to have something, not really, they're not worried as much on the cost, but in the how fast they can get it to market. So the agility stuff is key. You as an IT and as a vendor manager cannot move fast enough, the business is going to go and do it. And now they have a lot of resources to do. So I think it needs to adapt. It needs to be better, less barriers and be open to more options and to see how to embrace that.
What one thing do you wish your providers would do differently?
Well, the one word that I want to throw out there is trust. We have to learn to trust our vendors, and the vendors have to learn to trust us. So I'd like them to trust us more. I think they'd actually do more than they at this point. But when you build that trust, I think that partnership becomes a whole lot better. So to me, it's all around trust, actually, both ways. So if you can find a way to believe in the vendor that they're really looking out for your best interests, and then allow them to let that engine run that they do for you, I think that's where you're going to get the more value.
For me, it's really about understanding our strategic imperatives, what we're trying to accomplish, and being thoughtful about and proactive about working with us to define new capabilities or solutions. So, if you know that we're a programmatic acquirer for, acquisitions, then come to me with the thought that maybe there's a way to do that better.
Yeah, I think more in the tactical side, one of the things that I would love to change is how all the request for proposal process actually happens. There is no feedback process. Reality, you spend a lot of resources as a vendor to present a proposal, and then you didn't make the shortlist or you didn't win, and there is no even a single paragraph of what are the problems. And at the end of the day, I think the customers will benefit to have better vendors, and it helps them grow and improve.